Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of User Experience, meaning that I am pretty involved with anything we create that touches an end user. So I'm heavily involved with the design of lots of stuff at Smarter Balanced, including tools for teachers. And I'm also involved with accessibility concerns. So making sure that the materials that we produce at Smarter Balanced can be used by the greatest number of people possible, including those people with disabilities. And you might also know that the current digital library, one of the big problems with it is that it is an inaccessible website. So part of the decision to redevelop the digital library as tools for teachers comes from wanting to create a website that is accessible to all users. We're really excited about this development and being able to ensure that the site itself is accessible, but there is a hitch, which is any documents that we upload to Tools for Teachers likewise have to be made accessible, so that if I am a user with a vision impairment, or I use a screen reader, that I can not only navigate the website, but I can download the associated attachments and and use those documents for my students. So I want to talk a little bit about how to do that, and I will warn you that it's a pretty broad topic. There's a lot to it, and I'm going to give you the sort of bird's eye view of how to accomplish some basic accessibility, so that we're off on the right track with the documents that we create. So why accessibility? So, when we talk about accessibility, we are talking about the kinds of documents and the things that we produce and distribute electronically that all users will need to access, like I was saying before. So it's not just a website, but it's the documents that get posted to a website, for example. So at Smarter Balanced, we approach this from a couple different angles. For one, we just think it's the right thing to do. Everybody should have a right of accessing information, especially the kind of information that we produce for public education. So for us, it's just the right thing to do, and that's why we strive to do it. And related to that, it's an integral part of the Smarter Balanced mission. So accessibility is something we take very seriously with regard to our assessments. So we need to follow that line of thinking all the way through to the materials we produce, our communications, our websites, everything, and kind of lead by example in that sense. And then there's also legal implications. So we and our member states are vulnerable to lawsuits if we produce materials that can't be used by people with disabilities. So it's really important that we create materials that are available to everybody. We follow, you might be familiar with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, shortened to WCAG. This is a set of standards that we follow. It's sort of an international benchmark of how to produce accessible content. And it's pretty complicated, it's pretty involved, but it sort of lays out everything you need to follow to ensure that websites and electronic materials can be used by everybody. These are the guidelines that we follow. So you're very familiar with working with documents. Making them accessible can be challenging. There are a few additional steps you'll have to take, and that's what I'm going to talk through. Hopefully you're familiar with some of these already, so it shouldn't be too intimidating, but I want to talk through some of the basics around creating accessible Word documents and then the process of converting these to PDFs. So when I say accessible documents, I should probably back up and explain a little bit about what that means. So these are documents that are formatted so that users of screen readers or users with low vision or a variety of other disabilities can still interact and access the content. The primary way this happens with documents is that the different elements of the document, like headings and subheadings and images and tables, that these are all tagged in the right way. And by tagging, I mean that there's something going on behind the scenes, behind what you see on your screen in the actual code of the document, so that a screen reader can access that information, that content, and display it to a user appropriately so that they can understand the content. So just as you could look through a document and skim it visually and see headings and subheadings and bulleted lists, users of screen readers don't have that ability. So properly tagging a document allows a screen reader to do that kind of skimming for the user. And you can navigate between headings, and you can understand list items, and you can have images described to you if they're formatted correctly. So that's the kind of work that we're talking about doing, is setting up these documents so that we're able to take advantage of that technology so that those who need it can use it. So the first step I want to talk about is headings. So I've already mentioned document structure, things like headings and subheadings. And luckily, these are built in already to Google Drive, to Microsoft Word, to PowerPoint. Maybe you're familiar with them. Maybe you've just always seen this top bar in Office products and you've never really thought about it. But the styles palette that's available in Microsoft Word or these other programs gives you the ability to tag headings. And so if you've written out a heading, for example, and you have your cursor placed over the top of it and you click heading 2, that text will automatically update its formatting to whatever heading 2 is defined as design-wise, but it's also tagging that element. So it's saying this string of text is now a heading 2. And I'll show you in just a minute when we look at Google Drive how you can actually tell that that's happening. So the first tip, use headings. This is going to be really important for establishing the structure of your document. It also helps you with formatting and making sure you're following a consistent design of your document, but it's also helping with accessibility by ensuring that those elements are tagged appropriately. The second is alt text. So whenever we add a graphic to a document, especially one that's very meaningful, that might have text in it, that is carrying some kind of information that's not written out in text anywhere else on the page, we got to make sure that that graphic is available to users of screen readers. So a screen reader can't access the pixels that are in the image to know what it's saying or what its meaning is. So alt text descriptions are our way of writing a description of that graphic, inputting it into the document, and now a screen reader can take advantage of that description and describe it to the user of a screen reader. So we don't need to do this with graphics that are purely decorative. If they don't have any important meaning, if they're just there to fill up some space or to provide some aesthetic value, then we really don't need to use alt text. We also don't need to use alt text if you've described the image in text and the image is just sort of there as duplicating that description or that information, and it's just sort of secondary. As long as the information that you need to convey is presented somewhere, that's going to suffice. But if the image itself is important, is meaningful, we need to make sure that's available to all users. So you can ask yourself, if I had to describe this image to someone who is blind, what would I say? And that can be a good starting point for writing that alt text. It's not just an image of a book, but it might be page 25 of this novel that you're talking about that has a certain sentence highlighted, and you want to make sure that highlight is described to the user, for example. Alt text, there's a lot to it. Because of time, I'm not going to be able to go into it, but I do have some resources linked that you can learn more about how to write effective alt text. I'm going to have to fly through these because I don't want to keep you over. I will make sure, though, that Amy and Chelsea are able to follow up with these materials so that you can also access them later. So there's some ways of adding alt text in Word and in Google Drive and Google Docs. So check out these slides for screenshots and where to enter in that alt text. The third tip is contrast. So we want to make sure that for users who have low vision, that they are able to perceive text and meaningful graphics, for example, because they have appropriate contrast. So if you're using our templates, we have already set those up so that as long as you're not using other colors, you're not going to have any problem with this one. But if you're creating your own graphics, you just want to make sure you have good color contrast so that users with low vision can read everything easily. If you use tables, you want to make sure to keep them simple. So you can see this long bottom example shows lots of merged cells. So you see there's one cell that stretches the whole length of the table, and then you see 2 cells below that stretch a number of rows, and so on. And this is really complicated, not only for sighted users, but for users using a screen reader, it runs into problems with being able to parse the data in the table. So simple tables are preferable here. Also, if you're using Microsoft Word, there are built-in functions for checking accessibility. And you can rely on these to get a nice summary of what's going well in your document or where you might need to fix things with regard to accessibility. So I do recommend using these as well. The 6th tip is there are some settings you want to make sure you use when you're exporting to a PDF. So I've given you examples here from the PC version and from the Mac version of just double checking that these settings are selected. They typically are by default, but you do want to make sure these settings are selected so that the tagging information that you've entered in for your document persists into the PDF that you then create. And then 7 is if you're, I do recommend using Adobe Acrobat Pro, which has some advanced accessibility features, including an accessibility checker. And you can run this in Acrobat Pro to find out if there's any other errors with your document that you should address. It's not foolproof, and there can be some complexity to finalizing a PDF, but this is a really great way of at least checking and seeing if there's anything else that you need to do. Any sort of low-hanging fruit, I should say, that you can do to ensure accessibility of your document. So this PowerPoint includes some helpful references here, including one about the accessibility features of Google Docs, which I understand you all will probably be using the most. So check out that link in particular. And I will jump over to Google Docs really quickly just to show you a couple of those accessibility features that are available in Google Docs. So I have this document pulled up. This is another handout I'll be distributing after this call. So for example, alt text. If I need to enter in alt text, I can right-click the image, scroll down to alt text in this menu, and here is the menu option. And you really only need to use the description field. The title is a deprecated technology that's not used anymore. And in fact, recent versions of Microsoft Office have removed the title field altogether, and so you only have a single field. So use the description to enter in your alt text. In this case, I'm just reproducing the text that's in our logo, and so all I need to say is Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. You don't need to say things like image of or logo of. Screen readers will announce that it is an image, and so saying image of would be redundant to a user who's relying on alt text. So you can just include the description itself. And you can see a few more examples of that as well. And then finally, you'll notice I've got headings formatted, and you can see right up here in the styles palette, here is where those headings are selectable. Now, these actually benefit everybody if you use them, because now I can go over here to this outline feature and I can jump around the document. And this is created by virtue of using these headings that are in the document. So using these can serve a valuable purpose to anybody, but these are also important for screen reader use as well. But that is your very quick rundown of creating an accessible document.